Welcome to Keep Sane. This is cheaper than therapy for me. Today we're going to talk a little bit about comedy. Uh, Not me trying to tell jokes. I'm funny at times based on conversation. I would just be totally asinine to think um, that I could even hold a candle to the comedians that I admire so much. I guess the biggest thing is I've watched a lot of comedy specials. I mean, a lot. Like, my wife is tired of hearing about comedy specials. I want her to watch with me, and I rewatch them. I mean, like movies, I rewatch. I mean, just the nuance, the setup, the the topics that we have such a hard time discussing. Comedians, good comedians, have such a natural. Well, I mean, they work on it. To be fair, but they are able to bridge subjects and make you think without offending, or at least not as much as a standard conversation. And I'm a huge fan. So not just comedy movies. I have a major issue with current comedy movies because I think it has more to do with the current state of it has to be such a farce of reality that to find it funny, I don't know if we're numb to standard jokes, but like it seems to be over the top or most painful moment you could imagine to like the tenth, like 10 times that. And I can't watch it. Where everything's a cartoon character. But comedy specials. I mean, comedians these days they have such a better platform than they used to with Netflix, and I assume I don't know from a professional standpoint. I again, like I said, I'm not a comedian. If you've listened to any of these, you could probably say, yeah, he's an asshole. But you know, uh, Louis C.K., Joe Rogan, uh, Tom Segura, which is only like a month younger than me. Um, Chris Rock. And let's go to the classics: Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Eddie Murphy. I mean, those are the older guys, but like the newer guys touring, there's so many good ones, and I'm gonna forget a bunch. I love Tosh, and I like, Jesselnick. There's, I mean, there's a ton of, shoot, so I don't overly forget people, I'm gonna bring up a little bit of Netflix and go through some of the things I've recently watched. Um, but there's so many good comedians, and I don't analyze the comedy. I listen. I either laugh or I don't. Um, you know, and the thing is, I listen to it open-mindedly. Every now and then, someone says something. I'm like, "Hey, oh, well, why am I taking this seriously?" One, it's funny. Netflix just released one for Lynn, Coplitz, I think. She was really funny. Um, Nothing overly original as far as the content, but I still find it extremely funny. And there's nothing saying you have to bridge entirely new topics. You don't have to be totally edgy or totally vulgar. Um, it was so natural that it it felt like her, and that's one of the big things for me. If I feel like you're authentic, I mean and it's your point of view. I'm totally into it. Here's some. Let me see if I can find a subcategory of stand up so I don't have to look at all the other stuff. Um, Chappelle's new special, his two-part, absolutely recommend. Uh, Hilarious. Um, Always been a big fan of Gabriel Iglesias. Being an Oregonian, I don't live in Portland anymore. Um, but it was one of those things where I live in a little smaller area, not tiny, but it's hard to get comedians to come through. Gabriel Iglesias has come through town, was able to take my dad and my son to his special, and it was hilarious. It was almost like a rock concert. I mean, he redid some jokes, which I know some comedians are like, just let him die, but it was after like a full set. I mean, he did a full set of comedy I hadn't seen, and then he was like, "Well, let's go over some old ones." I mean, he was on stage for like an hour and 40 minutes, I think, which is insane. His opening acts were hilarious. Um, and it is different. Most comedians speak about in person versus trying to watch it online or, at home in your living room. And it's such a different energy live. And, you know, again, not a lot of comics come through. If they do, it's not smaller venues, um, which makes me sad. I'd love to see some of these guys in smaller, more intimate settings, but I get it. Got to make a living if you're coming through Oregon, get biggest bang for the buck. There's a lot of people who don't find things funny because they're a little oversensitive here. I'm not one of them. You can make whatever joke you want. I may not laugh, but I probably will if you're funny. Um, Rodney Carrington is, I'm not sure how current he travels. He's someone I've always liked in the past. Again, I'm on Netflix just looking through stand-up specials. Ali Wong, her baby cover special was hilarious. I've never seen it before. I haven't seen a special afterwards. I know they don't tend to do specials all the time. She was hilarious. I'm gonna skip a lot of people. I'm not gonna say anything bad about any comedian. I don't know if I mentioned Jim Gaffigan. I think he's hilarious, especially as a parent. It, he has way more kids than I can I can't even imagine having at this point. How he's still sane, I have no idea, but he's hilarious. Bill Burr, a little angrier than me, but believe it or not, but I think he's funny. Cristela Alonso, she was funny. I guess she had a show. I never saw it, but she was funny. I will say if you're a celebrity doing a stand-up thinking it's easy to be a stand-up comic, in your specials it shows you're not a stand-up comic. There's some people. I mentioned Joe Rogan at the beginning. I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan and Tom Segura. Ari Shafir, I heard of Joe Rogan talk about a ton on this podcast. If you haven't heard the Joe Rogan Experience, I highly recommend the podcast. You can watch it on YouTube. I don't know where else. I just watch it on YouTube. Um, but Ari, I've heard him talk about Ari a ton of times, but I finally watched his special, his two-part. Freaking just awesome. And if you can't laugh at his either side of his two-parter, you and I probably are not gonna. I mean, we might be able to talk, but we're not gonna find the same things funny, especially things that are a little more sensitive for some people. But hilarious special. And I'm not trying to leave anybody out. I'm just trying to really like the specials. Again, I watch specials over. I don't know why. I pretty much memorize them after the first time. Um, but I guess the whole thing is I think it's important because good comedians tend to be able to talk about serious issues we find in society without. I mean, they're trying to make you laugh, and I mean, I don't even know if they're trying to make you think about it. They're just trying to I feel like they're always trying to make America take every topic a little less seriously. Like, let's start a conversation, but they're doing it in the best way possible. Like, I'm stressed out, whether I should be or not. That's totally different. If you've listened to my stuff, you can make your own determination. This is not even episode 20. At some point, hopefully I'll hit high numbers. Again, who knows if anybody will listen to anything that I say, other than my poor family who has to listen to me. If you think this is tiresome, live with me. I'm nonstop. I like talking aloud. I like thinking through stuff verbally. Um, so anyway, but you know, there's so many great comedians that can really address things that most of us would, if you ever mentioned even a partially bad joke or a statement, you get fired or your head chewed off or called into HR to be talked to about what you say in the workplace. And Joe Rogan and Tom Segura and Ari Shafir, I mean, they're and a ton of the other great comics, they're so great at what they do. I mean, Kevin Hart is awesome. I mean, the one thing I was Kevin Hart, his last was in such a big venue, it felt a like a like a theater performance for at least part of it more than a comedy special. But it's a different audience. You can't do the same thing you're doing in small theaters and all that. Again, not as a comic. I listen to comedians talk a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts of theirs. I'm so jealous of Joe Rogan's podcast. And I have a special place in my heart for Joe Rogan. I mean, he's older than me, but he's one of the few guys who's intellectual and a musclehead. I mean, and I don't mean like that in the "Yeah, bro sort of thing, but it's he's a guy who black belt jujitsu, has a martial arts past, believes in being an actual man. Although he's is surrounded by girls with his wife and his daughters, but I mean he believes in being a man, and he could whoop ass. I mean, I'm a lot bigger than him, but I'm not gonna mess with the guy. Um, I would. I'm nowhere near the experience. He'd probably kick the holy shit out of me. Although the nice thing is he seems like an awesome guy, so I don't think there'd ever be a reason for us to fight, which is great. Um, like most things, I don't think there's many reasons for most people to fight, but guy makes me laugh. I will listen to his podcast. I mean, some hosts or some guests I can't really listen to, but most of the time I really enjoy listening to talk. I mean, he like me, or me like him, I guess, because again, I like to, he is older than me and he's been doing this a lot longer and he's traveled, so I'm not even gonna compare myself to the man. But listening to people, and he's one of them that really try to keep an open mind and try to evolve mentally and try to realize when they are getting overly defensive, evaluate it and try to get it to improve. I mean, it's inspiring, and there's a ton of people like that. I mean, I don't listen to a lot of guys' podcasts. I've listened to Bill Burr's, Eliza Schlesinger. I find great. Um, you know, there's just so much that I think needs to be said, and I think it's hard for most of us to get an open response, and I think that's where comedy is so important. And even regardless of the national platform and speaking to mass people, I think it's something that is important for if you go home and you're just in a shit mood, don't put on Game of Thrones or something that's tense and that's got the plot, kick the shit out of. Put something on that's gonna make you laugh. I mean, realistically, that's what you do. I mean, Kathleen Madigan, Louis C.K. Again, I'm scrolling as I'm talking. I mean, Mike Birbiglia, Jeff Dunham. I mean, shit, Jeff Dunham is one of the few people that still works, ventriloquism and, is awesome. Jen Kirkman, I really enjoy. Doug Stanhope, that guy. I don't think I've ever showed anybody comedy with such polar opposite reactions. I like Doug Stanhope. I think he's great. Um, but I don't think I've shown something so quick. I mean, Bill Burr would be a close second for when I show women. Doug Stanhope doesn't tend to necessarily occasionally turn them off as quick. And it depends on the special. Sometimes I pick the wrong special where, certain people go into their spouses or a ex-wife or something. So women, if they haven't laughed before at someone, in my experience, to Doug Stanhope, Bill Burr, some other people, Louis C.K.'s newest, or not, I don't think it's the newest. I think it's the Beacon Theater one, um, where people kind of turn off a little bit right away because of the initial topic. But realistically, if you can't listen through a comedy special, and good comedy, I'm not talking where it's, hey, I farted, and there's nothing wrong with a fart joke. There really isn't. But if it's an hour long worth of fart jokes, I'm gonna probably get a little bit numb after about 5 minutes of, dude, they were lighting candles and just wanted to barf out the window. I might get a little tired of it, but I'm pretty tolerant, so maybe not. Um, Someone who I've watched a couple times, Tammy Pescatelli. Not sure if she's still, I'm assuming she still tours, but she was funny. Um, Catherine Ryan I thought was really funny. She wasn't necessarily in the U.S. She's Canadian and was doing the special, and I think in England, but I watched that a bunch. I thought it was hilarious. Uh, Dwayne Perkins, the special on Netflix is Take Note. Laughed my ass off. Jim Jeffries' multiple specials, laughed a lot. Tracy Morgan's newest special was hilarious. Um, Sarah Silverman, funny. There were some things that honestly I got a little painful, but other than that, it was, you know, I laughed, and as a man, I would say, and again for Eliza or Sarah or anything, I sometimes it takes an extra second to laugh. It's funny, but sometimes you don't want to really hear stuff about yourself, about like men and like groups and stuff like that. Or you're still used to women talking like, a human being instead of having to be some closeted little, princess or, ceramic doll or glass doll or something. And that's one of the things I like. I like listening to as many different comedians as possible. Um, it's great. I find they talk about subjects that in a way that there's no way for me to ever just start that way. You know, it, another one I watched recently was Hassan Minaj. He was funny. The only thing I will say is I think I watched part of a TED Talk and it was kind of the same thing. And it's got to suck as comedian with all the technology around because as soon as anything hits the internet, to watch it again seems like a repeat. And I don't critique I don't critique things, but I didn't realize he was a comedian. I was watching it thinking he was like a TED Talk guy. And I think it was a TED Talk or something like that. He was telling a story, and then later I watched his special, and it was part of that. And I'm like, oh, he's a comedian, and he was funny. It's just it wasn't what I was expecting. So it was just one of those things that kind of caught me off guard. And that's one thing that throws you, and but not that it took anything away. I and there's no my thing with comedy is people want to judge it. And whether it's a TV show or in a comedy club, and I've never, other than in bigger venues because of Oregon, I haven't really got to witness good comedy in a smaller venue. The only thing I say is if you're going to go to comedy club, go with an open mind. Don't go expecting, like, if you're easily offended, don't go. Comedy is meant to offend you. I mean, for if you can deal with life, but not a comedy club, then I mean, I gotta question it. I mean, Jim Jeffries, Australian. Is it okay because he's Australian, even though he lives in the U.S. and now has a show? I'm, he's hilarious. It's just, what do you need in order to, laugh and not get offended? I mean, now to be fair, one of, speaking of Jim Jeffries and foreigners, Eddie Izzard, his was one of my favorite stand-up specials. There's Assume the Position by something Wool. It's been in a ton of movies, but it's more history based. And let me look it up here real quick. Assume the Position. Oh, with Mr. Wool. Let's see here. I don't remember where I even saw this, but Robert Wool does a American history thing, and it goes through presidents and all this other stuff. It's one thing I actually recommend. There's so much out there that's, you know, don't don't just listen to people you find funny and know are funny. Take a risk. Click, I mean, even if it's a star rating system, which I know Netflix kind of went away from, which I don't like, but even if it's something with one stars, try to listen to 20 minutes. I mean, obviously a good comedian wants to open strong and finish songs strong. So if at 20 minutes you hate them, well, try someone else. But you know, comedy's a hard thing. I can't imagine. I mean, even though I try every time I listen to something, I think, oh, what would I say is jokes? And I mean, I'm absolutely fooling myself. I can't imagine spending the time I'm doing this. But if you've laughed once, great. I like one-liners and everything else, but I'm far from being able to put together something that should offend somebody and being able to put a zinger in there that will make you laugh and maybe open your mind a bit to being a judgmental prick instead of being an open-minded person like we all should be. But um, it's me on my soapbox, as it were. There's a ton of comedians that I haven't laughed at that I have to turn off. If I haven't mentioned a comedian, it doesn't mean I don't like them. It just means I didn't happen to scroll by their name or remember them off the top of my head. And it's not like I've seen every comedian. I mean, I like stand-up specials, but I watch movies and I watch TV and I watch other stuff in amongst my life. And stand-up is something when you don't live in places with popular comedy clubs, you rely on, you know, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu or HBO or whomever to put the specials out. And I'm on Netflix. If it's an HBO special, it's not in front of me. Um, oh, but speaking of HBO, I believe he's on. And now I lost. Oh, Richard Jenny, hilarious. Um, watched a couple of his specials recently, and it just really comes. I mean, you can watch Howie Mandel. I mean, you can watch so many old ones and new ones, and just really. I mean, if you don't like listening to people like me, or just don't like listening to people talk about subjects, watch enough stand up, and you'll listen to people's experiences. I mean, and that's the thing. I can't say I've lived like a lot of people who've traveled and lived in different cities and seen a million different people and heard a million different stories. I just know what works in my mind and what doesn't. I know what makes me think, what doesn't, what hits me with information. And comedy's such a great thing, whether you're just trying to unwind from your day or you, you know, watch it to unwind and someone talks about something that you wish you could say it or gives you a way to talk to someone. Honestly, I've used people all the time think, "Oh, you're funny." Well, most of the time I'm just repeating jokes I've seen in stand up or the punchlines or someone talks about this, that, or the other that is so touchy if so touchy that don't want to offend anybody. And if it's the right subject, I have usually at least a few stand up punchlines in the back of my head. It's not original, but if you can get someone to laugh, you can usually get them to think for a second without getting angry. So it's a good way to break ice and, endear people to you, or if anything else, to move forward. So if anything, it helps you with talking to other people and all that. So anyway, I've rambled long enough for this particular subject. Please go to Netflix or whatever else and watch as much stand up. I mean, it's it's a great way to, you know, TED Talks and comedy is a good way to go and listening to different opinions and ways to just look at it. You don't have to change your mind, but keep your mind open and have a listen and have some fun and enjoy life. Have a great night.